to introduce to you our two speakers. Delighted to welcome for her first webinar with us, Ziba Goddard from Carey Consulting. Welcome, Ziba.
Hello, Jonty. Thank you very much.
And you're a consulting company, which is 3 years old. For those who've not heard of Carey Consulting, a sort of a quick thumbnail sketch.
Yeah, of course. We use the latest thinking from behavioral economics, psychology, and something called nudge theory to help businesses understand their customers better and make every interaction with their customers count. So we provide the science, if you like, behind your customer experience.
Wonderful. I'm also delighted to welcome back Chris Haggis for, I think, your third webinar with us. And Chris, it's a great banner you've got there behind you, make every conversation count. You're with the technology company New Voice Media, who are specialists in voice communications. Welcome back, Chris.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. And
you're going to be talking through some of the technology impacts of having a good conversation with customers.
Yeah, absolutely. We've put a lot of work into this. You know, with the advent of cloud technology, especially in contact centers, we don't need to worry about so much about the implementation side of getting the servers right and all that sort of stuff. It's much more about the configuration and the rollout and making the platforms do what we need for the customer journey. So yeah, we've got some examples we can share with your audience later on this afternoon.
Excellent. Well, we're going to have a replay of today's webinar. Will be available later on this afternoon. Callcenterhelper.com recorded webinars. We're carrying on a conversation in the chat room today. The address here is ever, callcenterhelper.com/chat. It does go into a separate window. Just put in your first name, last name, and email. And if your screen's big enough, put the webinar slides on one side, the chat room on the other side, and you can see what's going on. Added advantage being in the chat room is you can download the webinar slides. Quite a lot of detail we're going through. So just click on that link, and you can get copies of those slides. And there's an added advantage that we have got a bottle of champagne. In fact, we've got this one here, bottle of Tattanger for the best tip, or if you prefer, a box of chocolates.
But you can't show those, John, can you? Because you've already eaten them. Is that right?
Might have done. Or indeed an Amazon gift card if it's easier to.
Audience, I'm only joking.
Send across. No, we can't keep them in the office for some reason. I'm not quite sure why we can't, but we don't. So, but before we get going, what we want to do is just, we're looking at the key to better conversations with customers. And the first thing often you do is asking for someone's name. So we've got a poll here, which is how do you address your callers? Do you ask people, Mr., Miss, or Miss? Do you address callers by the first name? Do you say, do you mind if I call you, and then give their name? Do you say, what should I call you? Or does it vary? So what's the thing that you do in your contact center in terms of names and how you address people? Ziba, is there any behavioral science on this?
I don't think I've ever seen some research on this one. We tend to recommend a more formal and wait for the customer to have the power to ask you to call them by their first name. We tend to find when we're working in contact centers that works well, but I haven't seen a piece of research to actually sort of validate that, as it were.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. Let's have a look at the results here, and I'll share the results on the screen. So we've got a formal, about a quarter of the audience is formal, Mr., Ms., or Miss. We've got 22% use the first name. 14% say, do you mind if I call you your first name? I have a particular difficulty with that one because the name on my passport is Jonathan, though everyone knows me as Jonty. So people say, do you mind if I call you Jonathan? And it's like, I'd rather you didn't. Only my mother used to call me that when she was particularly cross with me. And nobody says, what should I call you? So that's interesting. Chris, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, do you mind if I call you the first name seems to be the most common that we see now. That seems to be the one that comes up most. So I'm a little bit surprised that wasn't up the top there. But as you say, I think, equally, if it's a service, Mr. being called Mr. or Mrs. is completely fine with me personally.
Indeed. So that's quite interesting. Some good feedback there. And yeah, so probably a good chance to have a look at some of the behavioral economics that come behind the key to better conversation. So probably if I pass across to Ziba Goddard, Ziba, if you'd like to share with us your thoughts on the keys to better customer conversations.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, John T. So, as I mentioned, we are a behavioural economic consultancy at Cowrie. So we use a lot of academic literature to inform how to best speak to your customers to get the most out of them, to either change their behaviour, to get them to do something you want them to do, or indeed to just feel good about the call once you've finished. So the literature, if anyone wants to go and read anything after this talk, these are the books I'd recommend. Brilliant books. It's become an incredibly fashionable field, behavioural economics. And I suppose the one in the centre is absolutely one of my favourites, Nudge. It's written by Richard Thaler, who won a Nobel Prize actually for his work in this field last year. And he was actually hired by Obama to get him elected originally into government, and subsequently went on to work in government for Obama. Subsequently, after that, David Cameron followed suit and set up the Nudge Unit, which is now referred to as the Behavioural Insights Team in our government, and they get us to change our behaviour, whether that be pay our taxes on time or pay parking fines or go to our NHS appointments. And really, this field of nudge is really all about the big small. So in other words, how seemingly small changes, it might be tweaks to the words in your script, it might be how you introduce yourself at the beginning or how you sign off at the end, and I'll talk you through some examples later on, can lead to these quite seismic shifts in behaviour, people deciding to buy products from you, people deciding to give you a very good customer satisfaction score, for example. So to sort of pique your curiosity, I'll give you a couple of famous examples of very effective nudges to show how these tiny changes can lead to a massive impact. So the $300 million button's one of my favorite. So this was for Best Buy, the huge online retailer. And 1 year, they had a workshop to understand how they could increase conversion through their website. And someone suggested putting this $1 on their site. One button, sorry, on their checkout page. And that year they measured that button. That year that button led to an increase in incremental revenue of $300 million for Best Buy. So I'm going to reveal to you what this simple nudge was. And it was this button, proceed as guest. So you'll see it everywhere now. And this was introduced in 2009. So it's been around for a while. It's sometimes checkout without profile. And what's brilliant about this is it understands the human mind. It understands how our brains work. So when you go you filled up your basket full of goods, we do it all the time, and you get to the checkout, you put your email in, then you go to password and you pop a password in that says, no, wrong password, and you try another one. Maybe put some capitals or an exclamation mark and it says, no, you're still wrong. And you go, oh God, for the life of me, I can't remember what this password is. And you decide to bail your cart. Or if you're a new customer, you go down to the register section and you go, oh God, this is going to be 10 minutes long. I haven't got my bank card on me. Do you know what? I can't be bothered to fully register now. I'm just going to leave it. So they were getting huge drop-offs at this point until they added this third option, which is cognitively very, very easy for people. Login is hard, register is even harder, but proceed as guest represents a really easy option relatively. And it was brilliant because people clicked on it and then it said, actually, do you want to just register all your details and be fully, you put your delivery address in because you need the stuff coming somewhere, you'd put your bank details in, and at the end it would say, fantastic, you've paid for your things, and Ziba, do you want to just fill out these 3 questions and fully register? And you go, God, that's fantastic. So the thing you weren't willing to do before suddenly becomes a great idea just because they've chunked up that process for you. Now this is the most famous nudge of all. You're probably wondering why I'm showing you a male urinal right now. Richard Thaler talks about this a lot. So this particular urinal is the most efficient urinal in the world. It's actually in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. And I think it's probably fair to say that men are usually drunk and or bored in airports. And suffice to say, these toilets were pretty hideous. Men weren't aiming where they needed them to aim. So they got a couple of psychologists in and asked how to cut down on men behaving badly in these toilets, and this is what they did. They simply etched a fly in the urinal, and what happens here is men come in and they subconsciously register this fly, and so they aim for it, and when they hit it they get this positively reinforcing dopamine loop in their brain that makes them want to do it over and over again. So that one fly led to a decrease in cleaning costs for that bathroom of 80%. Not sure it'd work on women, but a brilliant and cleverly simple nudge to show how we can seismically shift people's behavior from some very, very small tweaks to the environment. So to get your brains going in the post-lunch slump, I'm going to ask you 3 very quick questions. So if you can all make a note of your answers, either on a piece of paper or on your laptop, and I'll talk through the answer at the end. Okay, so kicking off with question 1. A bat and a ball costs $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? 5 cents, 10 cents, or 15 cents? So a bat and a ball costs $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? 5, 10, or 15 cents? Nice, easy one to start. Okay, question 2. Which is the lightest square here? Which is the lightest square, A or B on that image? The lightest shade. A, B, or neither? Okay, and question 3. How many F's are in this sentence? Finished files are the results of years of scientific studies combined with the experience of years. Finished files are the results of years of scientific studies combined with the experience of years. Is it 3, 4, or 6? Okay, and here are the most common answers. So for number 1, we had 10 cents for the ball. For number 2, we had square B was the lightest shade. And for number 3, we had 4 F's in that sentence. So I think, John T, should we do a quick poll?
Yeah, so how many of these answers did you get? Did you get all 3? Did you get 2 of them? Did you get 1 of them? Or did you get none of them? So how many of those answers did you get? I think we've got most people have voted now. I'm just going to close this. Sample size of 97. And here are the answers. 35% got all 3 of them. 51% got 2 of them. 9% got 1 of them. And 5% got none.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you everyone for completing that. That's fantastic. So that's actually in line with exactly what we always see with this quiz. Most people tend to get 2 out of 3 on this quiz. But what's interesting about this is that all of these answers in front of you are actually wrong. And the reason that some of you would have got these answers wrong is for these psychological reasons: frame dependence, relativity bias, and word superiority effect. And it's because our brains are incredibly predictable and systematic that our brains jump to a lot of those answers automatically without thinking. And that's what we do all the time when we're making decisions about how good someone is on the phone with us, about whether to buy a product, about whether we like someone. And I'm going to talk you through the answers now so you can see what's actually going on in this quiz. So for this one, the way that the question's framed, the words make us believe that we should split $1.10 and that the ball is actually 10 cents. But actually, if the ball was 10 cents, the bat would have to be $1 more, so it would have to be $1.10. So together they'd equal $1.20. So the ball has to cost 5 cents, so that if the bat is $1 more, it's $1.05 added to 5 cents, and you get $1.10. But the framing of that makes it very difficult to get to that calculation. This one's fascinating. So what's happening here is that these shades are in fact exactly the same shade of grey. But despite the fact that I've seen this about 144 times over my career, I still can't see that. And that's because our brains are ultimately overriding what we're seeing here, because we're making judgments relative to the available surrounding. If I change the relative context and I put 2 shades of grey next door to those 2 squares, it becomes much easier for your brains to see that they are in fact the same shade, and if I remove everything, it's very easy. But what's interesting is that knowing that now, if I go back, you still won't be able to see. And if you can see that they are in fact the same shade, your brains aren't working correctly here. So it's absolutely fine for you to see that they're different. And for anyone that thinks I might be manipulating the shades of grey here, I've got this one. So I think we'd all agree that the square below looks lighter than the square at the top. But if you hold up your finger and cover up the middle section of that image, you'll see that they are in fact exactly the same shade of grey. But take it away and it becomes incredibly difficult. So your brain sometimes does play these tricks. And then finally, this one, most people tend to get 3 or 4 Fs here. Most people tend to get the finished and the files and the scientific, but fewer tend to get the 3 ofs in this sentence. And that's for 2 reasons. The first is that when I read it out, some of you were encoding the auditory version of what you were hearing, and finished sounds like an F, whereas an of sounds like a V. So your brain didn't register it as an F. And the second reason is you can probably all read that sentence that I've just popped up below the speech bubble, despite the fact that it makes no sense at all. And that's because we're fluent in English, so our brains no longer read single letters, they read the word as a whole. So what's the science behind this? Just quickly, before we go into some examples of how we embed this in contact centres. Arguably the most compelling model of our brain to date is Daniel Kahneman's model, which talks about these 2 very different brains within our brain. The first he describes as System 1, but because he's not in marketing, we've rebranded it to Homer Simpson, because it describes a little bit about how our reptilian brain, our central brain that's evolutionarily ancient, actually behaves. Whereas what's happened over more recent evolutionary history is we've developed the prefrontal cortex right behind our forehead. And we call this part of our brain Mr. Spock because it behaves much more rationally and slower than our Homer Simpson brain. So this is ultimately the difference between our Homer and Mr. Spock brains. Our Homer is very automatic, subconscious, effortful and emotional, whereas our Mr. Spock is reflective, self-aware, deductive and effortful. So they operate entirely differently. And what researchers have shown is that 90 to 95% of our decisions every day are made by our Homer Simpson brain rather than our Mr. Spock. So I'd just like you to think about when you're speaking to your customers, whether you're making it easy for Homer to do what you want him to do, because if you're using jargon or complex processes or anything that requires more reflection and effortful processing, it's likely to check people out of the process and make them procrastinate and give up and feel negative about that experience. So I'd like to talk to you about how we apply all this thinking in the contact centres we work across in finance and retail. And what we've done is we've distilled over 150 mental shortcuts that we all use every day when we're making decisions about what to buy, who to like, who to be friends with, etc. We've distilled those 150 down into the 12 to 14 that are most important in everyday decision making, particularly when it comes to purchasing, so for businesses. And I'm going to show you how we apply some of these mental shortcuts that we all use. So this is one that we did in a contact center a couple of years ago, and we were listening to the starts of calls. We know psychologically that the start of the call is pretty much the most important point. It's something called the Primacy Effect, which dictates that when we first hear someone introduce themselves, we form an impression of them and we look to confirm that throughout the call. So we were hearing a lot of this. Hello, my name is Bradley. How can I help you today? And then the customer would unleash their query, which tended to be about 2 minutes long, especially in this company. It was pensions and a life business, so some quite complex queries. And then they'd say, okay, before I help you, I just need to ask you some security questions. So what we were saying is Bradley doesn't sound like an expert in pensions and life companies, or he doesn't sound like he's going to help me and give me the customer service that I need. And the other thing is, this customer was unleashing their query and then wanting to be looked after straight after, but Bradley was jumping in and then asking them security questions. So it was a very disjointed question, and often Bradley, after going through security, would ask them to relay their query so it was fresh in his mind. So really poor first impression. Now we know that authority cues of expertise at the beginning of calls are really, really important. When we think that someone's an expert or they're an authority, we place a lot more trust in their opinions. So, for example, doctors who wear stethoscopes have been shown to be trusted more than doctors that don't wear stethoscopes, despite the fact it has no bearing on their medical prowess. It's a cue of expertise. And the other thing is we quite like defaults. We like someone leading us through a call. And the default here wasn't set as I'm going to take you through security. So it became this disjointed process where the customer was given too much power, and it led to a very lengthy start to the call. So we simply recommended doing this. Hello, my name's Karen. I'm a customer service associate here at Cowrie. Can I start by taking your name and customer reference number, please? Thank you. And so I can help you with your query today, I'm just going to ask you 4 quick security questions. So there are 2 things going on here. The first thing is we're giving a cue of expertise. We're giving a metaphorical stethoscope at the beginning of the call, giving them their title. Title and years of service are really good cues of expertise. And then the second thing is we're just going straight into security and not giving them a chance to relay their query so that we can actually get them through that front section of the call and then tend to their query fluently afterwards. So this is another thing we hear. Just to talk about the results we got there, we actually, by just changing the start of the call, reduced the average handling time on those calls in an A/B split test over a number of 6 weeks by 17%, just by not getting the customer to repeat their query twice and having this disjointed front end of the call. This is another one we hear a lot of. So we often hear people managing silencers while they're reviewing the customer's records and saying things like, okay, I'll just have a look on the system, and then just silence and more silence. And often we hear the customer say, are you still there? Now, psychologically, we know that any ambiguity, when expectations aren't managed, we really don't like that as customers and people. When there's any ambiguity around what's going on, has that customer service representative dropped off? Have they been distracted? What's going on? We really, really don't like any unpredictability and ambiguity. So we said, don't manage silences in that way. Do this instead. If I go quiet for a few moments, it's because I want to make sure I have the most accurate and up-to-date information for you. Would that be okay? We didn't ever once hear a customer say, no, that wouldn't be. I don't want you to go and find some accurate and up-to-date information that you hold on me. And it's just managing the expectation perfectly. And finally, closing the call. So this is often what we hear, and we've heard it across 5 different businesses that we've worked with. Is there anything else this is at the end of the call. Is there anything else I can help you with today? The customer says, no, thank you. Okay, in the next couple of days, you may receive an email asking you a few simple questions to rate how well I've done today. Would you mind completing this for me? They often say, no, thank you. Now, what's happening there is that we've said that we don't need anything else. So we've just said the word no. And because we've said no, we like to be consistent with what we've previously said. So we're more likely to say no to something when we're asked to do another favour for that person. And this is all due to commitment bias. So we like to be consistent with our previous self. If we've committed to doing something, so if we've said the word yes before, we're more likely to say yes. So this is one of the things Thaler taught President Obama. He said, if you want people to go out and vote for you, you've got to get them to commit to going and voting that evening. So Obama decided to take this advice on board, and he'd say to people at the huge rallies, is everyone going to go out and vote? And everyone would shout out, yeah. And because they'd shouted out yes in front of lots of different people, it would then be quite strange for them to go and sit at home and not vote, because they'd made a commitment to themselves and others that they were going to do so. And we don't like to disagree with what we've said we're going to do, because it makes us seem untrustworthy. So we said it's very simply, you've got to reframe the end question to, have we covered everything you needed today? Yes. Great. In the next couple of days, you may receive an email asking you a few simple questions to rate how well I've done today. Would you mind completing this for me? Much more likely to say yes. And we actually got an increase in the number of people completing NPS surveys on this particular experiment. Again, this was an A/B split test over the course of 5 weeks, and NPS brilliantly jumped from +17 to +32. So I think that's it. I think I've given you quite a lot of information, and I'd love to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Ziba. Some great takeaways there. Certainly, the first impression is the most important part of the call. It's called the primacy effect. So start by controlling the call if you want to show authority. I think is a very good approach.
Absolutely.
I loved your approach there of doing an A/B test on all the things that are happening within the contact center. All too often we have initiatives in the contact center just sort of kind of come in without really thorough testing. I think A/B testing, just try using different language, different approaches, see which one works best. So it's not just sort of a conversation, you've got some real evidence behind that. I think that's great. And I love the one, get your customers to say yes. It's always a good approach. I think salespeople are very good at doing that, but it's very useful. Certainly, that's a great way of just increasing the number of people filling in your surveys. And if that leads to increasing net promoter score, that seems a very simple approach there. So some great approaches overall. Well, let's have a look at the chat room. Chat room's been relatively quiet today. So just a reminder, if you want to win today's bottle of champagne, start putting your tips in, or if you've got any questions for Ziba, then put those into the chat room, which would be good. So let's have a look at the first tip. Natasha says, always encourage conversation with customers by understanding their personality. I guess there's a danger that we have a one-size-fits-all in terms of personality. Ziba, what's your thinking on understanding the personality of the caller?
I think one of the key finding in behavioral economics is that we all have these very common traits. You know, we could say that personality would have impacted the scores that we got on that quiz, but we actually know that our brains are very predictable and systematic, and that a lot of us judge things in the same way. We like the same things. If we're told that lots of other people are doing something, booking.com, we're looking at the ratings of the hotels we're going to. It's very difficult to turn off these shortcuts that we all have inherently. But I absolutely think there's something to be said for having free conversation in calls, understanding what someone likes more of, or whether they need more hand holding, or whether they may be vulnerable in some ways, etc. So understanding the personality is absolutely crucial, but there are some more broad reaching things that you can do by applying these scientific shortcuts.
Indeed. Well, Louise, in answer to the question earlier about how to address callers, Louise said, we aim to address callers by how they address themselves, which I think is a good approach. And a tip from Ray, who said, my best tip is to use your customer's own terminology when speaking to them, as long as it's clean, of course. By using their own words, you're not only demonstrating that you're listening to them, but also that you understand. Very helpful with unhappy callers. This method can go a long way to taking the heat out of a situation. Chris, this is a sort of technique of, if you like, relaying, it seems an extension of relaying back what people have said to you. So, you know, I've got a problem with a broadband. Oh, so you've got a problem with your broadband. You're acknowledging that you've listened to the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Building empathy in that way, I think it could work. I think you obviously Ray's pretty skillful at doing that and practice, but can come across the wrong way sometimes, if you know what I mean. But yeah, no, I think you know, sometimes if you build up this rapport this way, it can definitely work. Yeah.
So a couple of tips here. Alberto says, put yourself in the situation of the customer to better understand their feelings. That's a big part of empathy. And Ziba, Stephanie says, motivate your agents to reset themselves after each call throughout the day to ensure they're giving the same level of energy to the customers throughout the call. How you do this needs to be personalized by your agent. Certainly things like, you know, sometimes you can build a little timer into the telephone system to give people a breather. Ziba, do you think that's important, keeping agents fresh?
I think I think so. I think it's a really hard job working in a call center. I mean, we sit and listen to these calls for days alongside agents, and there's so much going on these calls. They're often looking at two screens, trying to read previous correspondence, respond to people, be polite, make sure that the customers are getting everything they need. And there's a lot going on. And I think cognitive overload is something that definitely makes us feel overwhelmed. We've just got too much on our brains. So certainly helping them in any way on the call. So giving them some scripts and tips as they go through the calls with their customers so that not everything has to be thought about on the spot. Reduces that cognitive overload, making the systems as easy as possible. And then yes, a little bit of a break between calls is always going to be helpful if possible.
Kristen, you got any thoughts on how technology might help this without?
Well, I think it's pretty standard to have wrap up. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's obviously standard to have wrap up times on the systems, no problem there. But I think, as Eva said, getting through the script, getting through all of the points on the system to make sure they're cleared off, and then, I think absolutely, you have to have a break, you have to not overload, not have to, set the right amount of inbound calls per day, what the average handle duration is for those calls, and keep to that, and don't try and overload. It's detrimental to do that, absolutely.
Louise says we encourage the team to answer their calls with a smile, as it has a positive effect on the rest of the call. Certainly, that's a proven technique. And here's a question from Kristen. Kristen says, in our contact center, we often escalate to a second line team due to the nature of the issues. I guess this is in technical support. How would you suggest reducing the warm handoff time from employee to employee? So I guess is where you're trying to explain the issue rather than just chucking it across, as I was done on one support desk on Tuesday, where I had to go through security again, where you actually have a warm handoff. Any ideas to how to improve that whole process?
Well, maybe maybe it's followed through. A callback might be a better option, right? If it is a particularly technical issue and it just needs the front line to talk that through, the second line, make sure they're both in understanding, get all the details, and then the second line, the tier 2 calls the customer back, might be a better approach. I think as long as you cover that through, and as long as they respond within 30 minutes of them raising the issue, or whatever it is, or whatever it needs to be, depending on the priority of it, I think that's okay, because the last thing you want to do is keep the customer on the line, waiting.
Deepa, any thoughts?
I think going back to that authority bias, if you can make the customer feel as though they're going to be better looked after by someone who's an expert in this type of problem or query that the customer has, the handoff can actually be seen as quite a positive thing rather than a negative thing, the escalation. So often it's about using words. We worked somewhere where lots of people cancelled subscriptions to a key paper, and when they moved abroad, and we simply said, when someone called in to say we're cancelling because we're about to move abroad, we'd say, okay, let me pass you over to an expert in our expat team. Now, there wasn't an expat team, but it made people feel as though that this was a common thing, that lots of expats were still reading this paper from abroad, and actually it felt like a positive transition. So I think there's ways that the words that you use can actually create an extra level of service for that perception of service for that customer.
And I guess there's a danger that if you just purely looking at the time involved, as the words here, reducing the handoff time effectively, you might be slightly missing the point there, that maybe that actually is, as Siva said, is actually a positive thing. If you're actually explaining the problem, if you tell the caller why you're doing that, and that then might reflect then in a better customer satisfaction score and less need for the caller to call back. So that may be actually that reducing the time isn't important. It's the end result. Let's take a couple more tips before we jump into Chris's presentation. A smile on your face puts a smile in your voice. Oh, that's a nice one. I think we ought to make a little meme on that one, which would be good. And Harsh says the tip: always imagine the customer is in the room with you, and think about what you would like to happen if you were in their shoes. That's got a nice, a nice visualization of thinking the customer's actually in the room. I guess the problem with the phone is you can't, like a video where we can actually see each other, you can't actually build those queues.
Absolutely. I think it's a lovely idea. We've done some similar things where we redesigned all the scripts. We rewrote and redesigned all the scripts for a certain financial firm to have images of what the customer's emotion would look like on that specific script. So if it was a script about divorce or bereavement, we'd have a face looking a bit more puzzled. If it was a happy call, change of address, they're moving home, for example, maybe it would be a happier face, because we have mirror neurons in our brain, so we often respond to the emotion that's looking at us. So we've tried to do something that's not quite as good as imagining the customer right in front of you, but going some way to actually visualize what that customer might be feeling at that moment. Absolutely.
Indeed. Well, good a chance to jump across to Chris. So, Chris, if you could put your presentation up on your screen. And Chris, I think you're going to look through some of the technology considerations behind having a better conversation. If you'd like to take us through your
absolutely. Is the right screen showing up there?
It is indeed.
Fabulous. Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So firstly, to introduce myself again, Chris Haggis, I run the Customer Success Group here at New Voice Media, now a Vonage company. We were acquired last year in November. The Customer Success Group is really professional services, our support organisation and our customer success managers. So basically, I look after everything post the sale and make sure our customers get deployed correctly and then supported correctly. So the presentation today, I'm going to keep this brief. I think I've got about 10 minutes, and I'm going to just keep to three themes really around the better conversations. And if I can I'm just moving the screen around a little bit. There you go. Because there's probably hundreds of ways of attempting to improve your customer conversation. So I'm just going to focus on these three elements, looking at the customer journey maps, importance that we believe at New Voice Media we can imply on the employee experience, and then I'll give you a few use cases that some of my team have discussed and brought to me through our work here we do when we're setting up customers. So first thing, looking at the customer journey mapping. So I think it's really important to consider this. We all know that if for example in a restaurant, and this example in the top left here is a fictitious restaurant that's where they've mapped out, I think it's HubSpot, the company HubSpot have mapped out the customer journey for a restaurant, and you can see there's really lots of different touch points before you might sit down for your meal. What does the restaurant look like? What's the menu look like? All that sort of stuff. And I think it's really important to imply that into the contact center. So I think it'd be fantastic if we had someone like Fred Syriacs in our contact centers, and maybe some of you have got a character like this who looks at the journey, looks at what what's driving your customers into contact you. What does what if there's particular things that they're not happy about? Because unless you get all those surrounding environmental pieces right, you're not going to have a great conversation. You're not going to have the best conversation, and the poor old call center agent's going to be on the back foot. So if you haven't done this, most call centers have done this now. I think it's unlikely that they don't understand the full customer journey through all the experience. But if you haven't, find your Fred Syriacs in your contact centers and bring him out. Don't bring any Gordon Ramsays out though, because we don't want to upset them. So moving on. Hopefully some of you seen our campaign that we've been running around the horror of IVR. This is something we've been doing on LinkedIn and other places, but it's incredible that in this day and age we're still stuck with this experience of going through long IVR trees or being on hold for large amounts of time. With all the technology we've got, this shouldn't be happening. And I'd encourage you to have a look at onholdwith.com, sponsored by Fonello. It's a really interesting website. They've basically got a live tweets going of customers sitting on queues for contact centers, and there's some quite shocking companies that are topping the leaderboards on this. Hence why I've put the black pen across the names there, but you can have a look. And just the example I've pulled out there, you can see that called last night to complain after after being on hold for 45 minutes, the customer service rep told me to email. Well, that's ridiculous. You know, we've got the technology now. We know if we knew why the customers were calling in to complain, we can sort all that out. We can tell them to, you know, using an IVR message that that's what they need to do, what the process is. So, you know, again, setting up the good conversation, getting all the surrounding pieces, getting the customer journey right right up at the start there, so that when you do, if they do need to speak to someone, they're kind of not they're not in a bad place from word go. So the other thing we believe strongly on is the employee experience, or the agent experience, if you like. And you know, it's been proven. I think it's the Temkin Group have recently released a study where leading CX companies, or companies with a leading CX, have a 1.5 times more engaged employee base. So, you know, we really encourage, especially with our technology, as I say, we've just been acquired by Vonage last year, and that's enabled us to bring the communications platforms together. So it's allowed us to bring the contact center platform along with the unified comms, and just have one application maybe running inside the CRM platform. So making it easier for the agent to deal with customers and not have to switch between different applications and worry about what the technology is doing for them. You know, the worst thing is to have any bad quality or complicated phones to use or anything like that. You know, is the agent getting a screen pop so that they can see the data, they can see the context of why the customer's called through, what options they've selected in the IVR, and can the agent get to the data easily within the CRM system, or are they expected to flip between multiple chat windows if they're doing non-voice communications, that sort of stuff. So we thought we'd have a little poll here. I'll hand over to John T in a minute, but let me explain. So within your own call centers, what we'd like you to do is just poll or vote on how many different communication applications that your agents use. By that we mean that if they've got one application, they use one desktop client that does voice, chat, SMS, social, whatever it be. If it's all in one application, well done, you're the top of the tree, and that is you just vote one. If they've got 5 different applications just for this is just for the voice or customer communications, then obviously go for 5. It'll be 3. So if I hand over to you, John T.
Yeah, so how many communication applications are your agents using? For instance, phone, email, Twitter, SMS, Facebook, Messenger, WhatsApp, WeChat, just the number of applications that people are using to your agents are using. I think we've got most of the votes in here. Sample size of 99. Just share the results with everyone. And it looks like, Chris, the most common one, 53% have got between 3 and 4 applications. 9% have got between 5 and 7. We've got no one, it looks like, with 8 or more applications. And only about 1/3 of the audience have got 1 or 2 communication applications.
So you know, really, we should be down at that 1, right? We should be down at that 1 or 2 applications for this. You know, the technology now will allow call centers to have 1 application to run all the different channel types. So yeah, I think we've still got a way to go on that.
Great.
But that's useful. So thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone for polling. That's excellent. Okay, so the other thing that New Voice Media's got particularly good at over the years is identifying the customers as they queue, as they come through the IVR. Now, why is this important? Because obviously the best conversations are those with good context, those where customers are speaking to the person who can help their issue and help with their inquiry and get it resolved. Or just maybe even a personality match. We talked about that earlier in the chat, that maybe we can do something there. So the key thing with technology, again, is if you can identify the customer as they come through the IVR, whether it's on the calling line identifier or whether it's on the account ID that they've entered, you can then use that data to look at your CRM system, find out who they are, and then match them to the best agent to help that. Technology now doesn't have to be complicated. This, you know, the stuff we do is all out of the box. You don't have to get coders in to build this sort of stuff. And I really do think that, you know, anyone who's kind of not getting to this level now is really on technology that they should look to refresh. Finally, well, the final part of the kind of technology area, I guess, is speech analytics. So we released a product called Conversation Analyzer at the end of last couple of years ago, and it's been an excellent way to find out what's been going on in the conversations. So what you can do with this technology, if anyone doesn't know, and it's pretty well it's pretty well understood now, but you can trawl through your call recordings, convert it all to a text version, and then you can mine that data or search through that data. So look for key phrases, look for particular categories, and it's a great way of building up your quality management processes and getting through 100% of your calls rather than the selective sort of 10% that we're all used to. And some of the things we've been doing with our customers. So this was a gaming company who wanted to use hold time and really understand what hold time was being seen inside their calls, because they believed that long hold times had a strong correlation to poor experience. So what we were able to do was categorize all of the calls using the words that were said, and then look at and then analyze the hold times. So so just for example, there you can see that Andrew, 88 of his calls had 73% had desirable hold time, which is good. And again, that's pretty hard to do if you were to try and do that manually. You're not going to listen to all those calls, but using the technology, using the speech analytics product, our conversation analyzer, we were able to do that. Oh, sorry, I'm going to put technical issues there. And in a similar example here, again with speech analytics, you can see here that with this customer wanted to use a bit more data within the reporting. They actually wanted to really drill down in the politeness of the conversation, or the behaviours that were really being used to make sure that the calls, that their agents were being polite and courteous. So yes, we were analysing what was said in the opening and the closing. Those were important. So the script was adhering to the appropriate openings and closings. But more importantly, I guess, were things like talk over. So with speech analytics, you can look at to see if an agent was over talking on a customer, which we all understand that would not be particularly polite and was something that should be avoided. So this particular customer of ours was able to use all this data within their scorecard, which brought it a much bigger depth into the behaviours of the agents, and able to use that within a more sophisticated scorecard. Final slide then. So this is just a typical dashboard that we built for a customer. I think this one's on Salesforce. They wanted to make sure that they wanted to understand what was the most common greetings and behaviors that were being used, all the common sentences. So you can see that nearly all of the calls here on the top left, you can see that they had the correct opening. Well, that's kind of expected, right? You wouldn't expect an agent to answer a call and not say the standard greeting. So that was kind of, you'd expect that to be green. You want to make sure that the particular behaviors, so top middle, that are positive. So we can see that all the behaviors that this particular call center were looking for were in the right ballpark, which they were. So we're hitting that one. Looking at the trending. And then the bottom row, what this customer did was they put values onto the behaviors, because, for example, saying the right opening greeting, yeah, that's important, but it might not be the highest scoring thing. Of course, saying your call's being recorded, or offering a follow-up, or or mentioning some sort of particular compliance thing that has to be said, that may have a higher score, and that must be a behavior that has to be adhered to, so we can put a higher score on that. And of course, maybe as we discussed, if there's talk over, that's really that's not a behavior you want to get on the conversation. So scoring that one as a particularly negative behavior would be important. And just to make the point there, obviously, once you've got that data, once you're scoring these behaviors that are being said in the call, you can then build a leaderboard on showing who's particularly good and who's particularly bad. So you can see Alison and Chris are top of the leaderboard there. All right, so I hope that was useful. I will hand the screen back to Jonty for any questions.
Well, thank you very much for that indeed, Chris. Some great tips there. I'm certainly going to check out that onholdwith.com. Quite interesting. You said no one can hear you scream in the IVR system. My worry now is no one can see you scream. I get with the chat bot even worse. Speech analytics can help you to improve your conversations. I think is a great one there. And I love the approach there of cross-correlating hold time against customer experience scores. I think that would be a very useful thing in your organization to do. So if you'd like to have a...
Well, that was just that particular customer interested in that from one of our professional services consultants. That's what they were asked to implement. Now, that's just one element, as we know, but quite a strong one.
So I think that'd be a good one in a contact center. If you can do that, you might get some interesting tips from that. If you'd like to see a demonstration of the new voice media solutions, and looks like that conversation analyzer might be a very useful thing to have a demonstration of. So if you'd like to have a demonstration of the conversation analyzer or any of the other new voice media solutions, if you'd just like to put that into the box currently. And I'm sure Chris would be more than happy to arrange that for you.
Yeah, of course.
So let's just have a look at some of the top tips and questions that are coming through from our audience. Michaela has said, focus on first contact resolution. There's nothing more frustrating than having to call back because the request was incomplete or completed incorrectly. We can combat this by asking clarifying questions. In a similar light, Ashley has said, don't multitask while talking to someone. Put down all other technology when talking with the customer on a phone line, and always reflect back what you understand to ensure that you're accurately understanding what the customer or the potential customer is saying. I guess, Steve, there's always a danger of trying to multitask in the contact center, particularly on things like live chat. Do you think that's a bit of a danger?
To be honest, I haven't seen a huge amount of multitasking. I mean, maybe it's the sort of Hawthorne effect of the fact that I'm sitting next to these guys whilst they're on the phone, so they probably wouldn't be checking their phones and things. But so many of the calls I've listened to are so busy with getting the customer information and relaying it all back that there's not a huge amount of time to do anything else actually. But absolutely, when you say something and you get a slightly different response, or you feel like the associate hasn't heard what you're saying, that's going to be a really negative point in the call, and you'll look to confirm that that person is doing exactly that throughout the call once you've made that impression of them.
And we've got a couple of tips along this way. Jill says, take notes during the call. If they're celebrating a special occasion or they give you their pet's name to you, then you can refer back to that as you engage and connect with the caller, and that will help them connect with the product or the service that you are providing. That's certainly a good one. A lot of information just gets thrown away, which could be useful for developing the conversation. Dennis says, always allow proper time in the call to understand the customer needs before you propose a solution or products. Often customers do not articulate their needs well, and not validating these needs will lead to the wrong resolution, which I guess could increase the number of calls coming back. Well, we've got a question in from Mark, who says, how do you make a person that is in a very emotional state make logical conclusions or logical decisions? Ziva, any thoughts about if a customer's in an emotional state, how you deal with that?
Yeah, it's very hard. When we're in we call it a hot emotional state in psychology. The best thing to do if you feel that they're not going to make the right decision is to have what we'd describe as a cool-off period. Certainly the FCA to refer to it as a cool-off period as well, where you disengage for a moment. You might call them back in 5 minutes, but that it doesn't feel ethical often to let customers start making decisions when they're in a very emotional state, and we would always urge people on the phones to consider that and recommend a cooling off period if it doesn't feel appropriate. Yeah.
I guess there's also an element of taking the heat out of the conversation. If the customer's very upset, something's gone wrong, yes, then sometimes oh dear, let's see what we can do about this. I understand you've got this problem, and just start talking about let's sort this out together, and just then articulate. Let them, as I guess some of the other tips are, let them time to get off their chest everything
Definitely.
that's affecting them, and then once they've moved on to a different level where they started to calm down, then to start seeing about how you can resolve that. Alex says the biggest tip I give my team is to truly listen to their customers. Again, similar theme: listen to the customers and avoid interrupting the customers mid-flow, which I guess is always a danger.
Well, that's the crosstalk I was mentioning earlier, or the overtalk. Yeah.
And Todd has said on that previous question about the emotional state, make sure you explain that you understand the frustration and offer to help solve that problem. I guess it's empathizing with what the caller's feeling. So here's a question that's in from Alfie. It says, how do you feel about an operator stating to the customer, I'm just going to ask my supervisor? Do you think this reassures the caller that the correct decision will be made? Or do you think it's that gives the impression the operator handling the call isn't cut out for the task?
Yeah, well, personally, I kind of like that, right? Because it's checking, right? Validating. It's a validation point. So it's back to that kind of, that authority, that point to make sure. I like it.
Yeah, I think you're handing over the authority to someone else and reducing the authority of the agent on the call, and that would be my concern with that. If you're going to check that you have the most accurate and up-to-date information, and that you'll take a moment, I think that's absolutely fine. You absolutely want that person to go and do that. But passing the authority and perceived expertise to someone else could cause the customer to feel that they're being looked after by an inferior agent.
Indeed. So I think it's all about control on that. The flip side is when the caller asks to speak to a supervisor. That can also be very frustrating if the advisor then doesn't do it and say, oh no, I can help that with you, and then almost digs in and won't allow you to escalate the call. Right, here's a tip in from Jonathan, who said, I'm reading the book How to Win Friends and Influence Others, which I think is I read that many years ago, Dale Carnegie, if I'm not mistaken, with many of my agents and leaders. And many of the same principles in this book relate very well into interaction in call centers, getting the customer to say yes, understanding the customer's point of view. So I think that's another one potentially to add to that bookcase, Ziva, that you had.
Absolutely.
Have you read this book?
Yeah, it's got a lot of the same principles as behavioral science, things like reciprocity, things like commitment bias, getting customers to say yes, etc. However, it isn't actually based on science. There's no research. It has been slightly debunked subsequently because of the lack of academic underpinning. But I think a lot of the principles in there are fantastic and are things that we teach today. So yeah.
Indeed, Chris. Any books that you've been reading of late?
No, I read that many years ago. Fantastic book, very famous book. Yeah, good. What have I read recently? No, nothing that comes to mind actually. nothing in call centers anyway. I read a fantastic book. I think it's Henry Foster, the guy who paraplegic who paints with his mouth, paints with the brush. That's fantastic. Really inspiring book. I think it's Henry Foster. I'm going to get that wrong.
Okay, well, we'll have a look at and we'll see if we can put that into the chat room. And a tip from Jamie, focus on getting the underlying concern of why the customer called through good questioning and summarizing. So I think good questioning has come up a lot. Well, unfortunately, we've reached the top of the hour. I'd just like to ask the question of you, what did you like best about today's webinar, which would be good. And here's the winning tip. Winning tip came in from Tom. It said, allow more time at the start of the conversation. Don't assume you know what your client or customer needs straight away, and allow them time to talk and give yourself the chance to see the bigger picture. Once you know more, there is less chance you need to go back and forth with them down the line. It's a win-win for everyone. So complete the survey. I probably need to get you to say yes to this one. So I should have got you a yes. So if you wouldn't mind completing, so if you've, have you enjoyed today's webinar? Yes. Or when you leave the webinar, please fill in our survey. You can watch the replay and the slides later on. And just like to say thank you very much to our two speakers, to Ziva Goddard. Thank you for joining us, Ziva.
Thank you very much, Jonty. Enjoyed it.
And for Chris as well. Thanks for joining us as well, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And look forward to seeing you all next Thursday. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.